Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In this lesson, we will continue the, what we started with about development Awqaf and the mode of financing the development of Awqaf. Now, let me see what happened. I cannot see my, okay. The first, one of the, most convenient and most used modes of financing, and which is very popular by Islamic banks in any case, is what is called ijara and leasing in English, ijara. Now, ijara is a Sharia compliant mode of financing, but I must say that point out that there are two types or two basic types of ijara, or two basic types of leasing. There is the operating lease and there is the capital lease, or what is known as the financial lease. Now, there is a basic difference between these two. The difference is about ownership, and the other difference is the matter of intention. I'll explain. An operating lease is an alternative to ownership. It means you can have the option to buy or to lease. You can buy a house or rent a house. You can buy a car or rent a car. So the leasing is therefore an alternative to ownership, and ownership is not transferable, and the payments that are made, when you are paying the rent in an operating lease, you are paying, the right to use the asset that you are leasing. So, as we can now determine, is that the operating lease is an alternative to ownership. In an operating lease, the asset will always remain with the lessor. If you rent a house, well, that ownership does not transfer. It's always with the owner. And so the ownership will stay with the lessor, and it will be returned to the owner when the lease terminates. So you vacate the house, and the house now is under the full possession of the owner. And the payment, as we said, the rent is for the right to use the place during the term of the lease. Operating leases usually are short-term and are easier to cancel or terminate if we compare them to capital leases or financial leases. The second type of leasing is the capital lease, and this capital lease is an alternative to financing. Is not an alternative to ownership. It means you want, the lessee, the one who wants to lease, the lessee, he wants to buy the asset, and he wants to finance it by way of lease, by way of rent. It means as you pay the rent, you are acquiring that asset gradually. So the intention, and that's what I mentioned, that again, the difference between the two is the matter of intention. It means the lessee, really, his intention is to own the asset, and the leasing structure is just a financing alternative. Instead of financing it by borrowing, by murabaha, by some other modes of financing like ijara, Kart Hassan, whatever, therefore the intention or the methodology is that he can go and do a financial lease. Therefore, a financial lease or a capital lease is a mode of financing with an option to own the asset. Capital leasing tenors range from medium to long term, which means, they range from 5 years to 15 years or more, actually, depending on the type of the asset and depends also on the amount involved. And the rental installments, they are of two components. In that installment that the lessee is paying, there are two components to it. One part is for using the asset during that term, and the other part of that installment is, to purchase part of the asset until, he completely owns the asset. So a capital lease or a financial lease is, in essence, a hire purchase agreement, or in other words, it's a rent to own facility. Okay, this is the difference between the operating lease and, now both are Sharia, and perhaps, in my view anyway, the operating lease is more Sharia compliant than the capital lease, and I will explain that now in the second slide. The general rules of ijara financing, banks, and in particular, Islamic banks, they like ijara financing more than any other mode of financing. Well, let me tell you again, I will retract a little bit about the the intentions. The bank, as a lessor, he's not interested really in owning the asset. Okay, he is interested on really financing, and this is why I say. On the other hand, the lessee has the intention to own the asset, and this is the difference. So ijara is a compliant mode. The lessor, that is, let's say, the financier, the lessor, he's the lessor, he owns the asset on lease, and this forms part of the security. So that's why banks like it, because they buy the asset, they lease it out, at the end, they will get their money and the asset goes to the buyer. But in the meantime, the asset remains as a security. And that's why this is one reason why banks like, like the capital lease or like financing by lease. This is one reason. So the bank also, another reason, bank can also apply a variable markup rate by benchmarking the amounts of rent to, let's say, LIBOR or to some other index. And this is permissible because you say, okay, I'm leasing you, now I'm changing the rent, and that you can, as an owner, you can tell, the lessee that, now the rent is changed, and that's agreed. No problem with that. Okay, of course, that will have to be in the terms of the lease in the first place. That this lease, we will have variable basis for calculating the rent, and that this is another reason why banks like it, because if they are benchmarking, let's say, to LIBOR, and the LIBOR goes up, they would like to means, the bank, if he keeps the financing at the lower terms, it'll be less profits for the bank. And that's why they like it again, because it's, rents can be adjusted up or down as the case may be. The bank can change the installment according to these indicators. Again, there is another reason that the bank, as owner of the asset, he can sell the asset. He can sell. Say, if the bank is leasing, financing by way of lease a car, let's say, or any asset, as an owner, he can sell it, and another buyer will take the asset, and the lease will continue with a different owner. And this is another attraction for banks, because what they can do, sometimes they can go and they package a number of leases into a lease fund, and they can issue units on them. And that's why you will see sometimes many leasing funds based on leasing, and investors can then buy the units. And in fact, what they are doing, they are buying a small portion of the assets in that fund, and that's their security also. And the lessee's consent to the sale of the leased asset to a third party is not necessary. So the financier is free to sell. He does not, need a permission from the lessee to sell the asset to another one, because that will not disturb the arrangement that is undertaken in the first place. The two parties in the lease agreement, the lessor and the lessee, have different liabilities in a leasing agreement. All liabilities arising from ownership shall be borne by the lessor or by the financier, by the bank. Okay, these ownership issues, for instance, if there is you are leasing me, let's say, a car, if it's not working, or there is a structural damage that occurred, then this is all the responsibility of the owner. And therefore, if there is owners usually take an insurance policy to protect that part. But any liability or damage arising from the use of that asset, then it becomes the responsibility of the lessee. See if the damage or of anything that happened because negligence or misuse of the asset, then this is the responsibility of the lessee, not the lessor. So there are liabilities on both sides. In a financial lease, as we said, the asset is the lessor's main security, because ownership will not pass to the lessee until the transfer takes place at the end. And when the end comes, when all installments are paid, that's when the ownership goes from the lessee, from the lessor to the lessee, and this will terminate the arrangement. Now, as I said, the asset that is under lease forms a security to the lessor, but usually banks still, they may ask for additional security on top of that. You see, they say, okay, I'm financing this asset, this is the financing arrangement, and so on. The asset will go back to you, but they may still insist on some additional security beside the asset, because the asset, to start with, is not under their control. And You don't know what happens during the term of the lease. It is usually, at the beginning, when they are drafting the agreement, that the contract includes sale of the asset on expiry of the lease agreement. Now, if it is a full payout lease, it means at the end, خلاص, the asset, with the last installment, the asset will go to the lessee. Or sometimes what they do, they have just a small or a token, say, okay, at the end, to make a sale, because we cannot have two, according to Sharia scholars, some of them, they say you cannot have two contracts in one. This is a lease. And then at the end, you are transferring the asset from one owner to another. So there is a sale, and therefore there must be another contract called the sale contract at the end of the lease. And usually it's made for a very small amount, token amount, maybe $1 or $10, something like this. This is in the case of full payout lease. The payment at the end is for a very, very small amount. Now, if the term of the lease dictates that there is a residual value, it means that a residual value lease, it means that during the rental installments do not fully pay the the price of that asset. So there is usually a small amount or whatever amount, and they call it the residual value of the lease, and that will be payable at the end of the lease before the ownership is transferred to the lessee. Now, ijara is basically a binding contract on both sides, on both parties. And once it is executed, it cannot be revoked unilaterally. You see, in an operating lease, it can be revoked because by any of the parties, the tenant can tell the owner, thank you very much, I have circumstances, I want to go. Or the owner can tell the tenant, look, you did not conform, or there is something else, or I want to terminate the lease. And that, but in a financial lease, both parties have to agree, because then there are calculations to be made to see what is the right of each one. And sometimes you see the lease in a financial lease, the rent may start even before delivery of the asset. Say, if we are financing a lease, إجارة موصوفة بالذمة, something that is yet to be delivered, but we are making it for you, it is possible that the rent will start even before possession, is handed over to the lessee. This means that the lessee's liability for the rent may start before he takes delivery of the asset. However, both parties can amend or terminate the contract with mutual consent. Also, an ijara contract is not terminated with the death of either party. You see, a financial lease, say, if, let's say, the lessee dies, then his heirs are responsible, because, as I said, financial lease or capital lease are financial arrangements, and there is a financial obligation, and that will have to be settled somehow. Okay, it can be arranged, but it's a bit complicated, and it may need some legal arrangement to do it, because it has to do something to do with the estate planning and so on. How a lease is to be accounted for should always be foremost consideration. Improper structuring can cause undesirable accounting treatment. The Financial Accounting Services Board and the AWOFI, they have put extensive and complicated set of rules on accounting for leases. The accounting treatment varies significantly and depends on whether the lease is an operating lease or a capital lease. There is a difference. The deciding factor is whether the leasing agreement provides for transfer of the lease at the end of the ownership or not. If yes, the lessee must record it as an asset on the balance sheet, although he does not have it yet, in possession. Although it is still on rent to him, he still must, put it on the balance sheet as an asset and an obligation for amount. And the payments, they are liability or something. And what they put as the asset, the present value of the minimum lease payments. What is the present value of the amounts yet to be paid? That's the value of the asset on the balance sheet. Now there are two modes of financing. These are outdated. They are hardly used now, but still they are in the in the literature or in the modes of financing of Awqaf. And there are still some Awqaf till now that are under these two modes of financing. One is called hukr. Hukr is an Arabic word, means an indefinite right to lease or to use the asset, indefinite. And the other one is called ijaratain. Ijaratain means two ijara contracts, two lease contracts. I'll tell you the difference between the two. Hukr, as I said, is a very old mode of financing that was devised by earlier Sharia scholars to solve the problem of lack of funds for development and to overcome the problem of inalienability of a waqf property. So you cannot sell a waqf property because Awqaf assets are considered to be inalienable. Inalienable means they cannot be sold or mortgaged or anything. So what's the alternative? Is you, instead of selling it, you give it an indefinite lease, a hukr. Now, hukr is a leasing contract of an indefinite term. The lessee makes a large down payment. This is the issue here. A large down payment, which is nearly equivalent to the value of the lease, of the asset. Say if you are taking hukr over land, the lessee will have to pay an amount which is almost equal to the value of the land, and leaving a small amount which is paid, periodically, just to keep it as, Sharia, as a hukr, that we did not sell the land. We are still getting rent from it, but in fact, it's like a sale, but disguised really as a lease, because the what is paid, the amount, the lease is the rent that is usually paid comes to a very small amount, maybe something like 2 or 3 per thousand of the value of that land or of that asset, which is negligible. But it was favored because the Waqf will take the full amount, almost all the full amount. He takes a big amount, which is equivalent to the value of the land, and he can go and buy another one, while still maintaining the ownership of that land and getting small amounts on it. So Um, in that way, the haqr is not all that unfair. Awqaf gets the initial sum, which is equivalent to the value of the asset. The money will enable the Waqf to acquire a new Waqf property or to improve another Waqf property while still holding title to the haqr land. So the significance of the nominal lease is not its amount, but the fact that it serves as a constant legal reminder that this land is a waqf. Okay, although they have no control over it because they have gave this indefinite lease. And you see, in the indefinite lease, the lessee, it becomes like his asset, and he has the right to pass it on as part of his inheritance. Okay, we come to the ijaratain lease contracts, and then we will tell the difference between the two. Ijaratain is like a haqr. It's a very, very long-term lease, indefinite lease sometimes. Okay, this is usually used for when you have an asset in a very bad shape, like in a building that is uninhabitable, and therefore the lessee or the tenant, he goes and he pays to the waqf, a big amount in order to repair that property, and then he will pay a small rent on it. Now, where is the difference here is that the waqf received the money, but only to repair an asset that will go to the tenant to use. This is the condition of the money that they got. They cannot go and buy another asset like in the way of haqr, but to repair that asset and then to rent it at a very small amount. So in this way, we can see that haqr perhaps is slightly a better alternative than ijaratain when we are comparing the two. Now, in some countries like Egypt and Jordan, and they have limited the haqr and the ijaratain leases to 50 years. They say you cannot have an indefinite. They started to put a final time for these two modes of financing. This is recently, but there are still, haqrs and ijaratain based on this all till now, and in some parts of the world. Okay. I'll talk here about ijara issues relative to awqaf. The issues are basically, they are Sharia issues. The main issue is the issue of ownership of the underlying asset under a lease agreement. The question of intent is crucial, as I said before. Some Sharia scholars do not permit the ijara muntahiya bit-tamlik or capital lease on the ground that it is in essence a deferred sale. It's not a lease. And matter of fact, even in the West, these leases, they are treated as deferred sales, and that's why, as I said, the lessee, the one who is renting, must put it on his balance sheet as his asset because he is obligated to buy it, and what he is paying the financing of that purchase, the purchase of that asset. the lessee has no intention other than acquiring the asset, and the lessor has no intention other than financing the asset. The title of ownership is transferred to the lessee when all installments are paid. Other Sharia scholars view that إجارة منتهية بالتمليك serves the objective of Sharia or مقاصد الشريعة and is justified innovation in Islamic finance. So they sanctioned it. Other issue is that the rent payable is not market related. You see, in the financial lease, in an operating lease, when you go to rent an apartment, you have to pay, they say, okay, the market for a 2-bedroom apartment is that much, this location, and so on. So it is tied to the market level of rentals. But in a financial lease, the rent payable is not market related for a similar asset. While fixing the rent, you see, the financier or the bank, they calculate the total cost incurred for the purchase or building of the asset and adds a negotiated profit margin or markup rate, which is normally payable on such an amount for the term of the lease. Now, considering that the transaction is a deferred lease, Awqaf will be buying the asset gradually with the payment of each installment. Therefore, Awqaf will have equity under mortgage. This is another issue. So if Awqaf is buying an asset under this term, so Awqaf, it means they don't have full ownership, but they are sharing that ownership with some other party. And that other party is using that asset as a security, which also contravenes the Sharia rule that Awqaf assets cannot be pledged as security. So there are issues here to consider. Another issue is the binding promise by the lessee to purchase the asset at the end of the lease contract and at a price equal to the residual value. Now, in this arrangement, the lessor or the bank, who is the owner of the asset, transfers all the risks of ownership of the asset to the lessee, even before passing the title to the asset. You see, in the case of banks, they usually don't like to carry any risk of the asset, and they put it in the contract that the lessee who has possession, and since it's going to be his, is responsible for all risks. And this again may have some issues with Sharia scholars. Again, another issue is that ijara and sale are two different contracts with different governing rules. Some Sharia scholars recommend that a lease agreement should not contain a precondition of sale or gift. Ijara is a sale, but ownership remains with the lessor. Transfer of ownership should be made by executing a separate sale contract that will continue effective on the future date. And on that future date, the price, if it is a separate contract, it means the price must be determined, at that time. But the price is predetermined, and therefore, there is again some issue in the, from Sharia point of view about the prices that are paid on termination. Mudaraba is a profit-sharing contract between two parties in a business venture. The parties consist of the capital provider or the investor or in Arabic they call him Rabbul Mal, the one with the money, Rabbul Mal. And the Mudarib is the entrepreneur who will manage the venture. So ideally, the capital provided should be in cash, because if it is in kind, say if Rabb al-Mal gives commodities or some other assets instead of cash, then there would be the possibility of uncertainty and dispute over the value, whether this value is, the right compensation for, or the right amount to be paid. The Mudarib shares in the profit and has no right to a salary or a fee. Okay. He takes the money, executes the venture, and he takes a share of the profit, if there is a profit. If there is no profit, he doesn't get anything. If the venture is profitable, the profit will be distributed on the basis of pre-agreed ratio between the capital provider and the Mudarib. In the case of loss, the loss shall be borne solely by the capital provider unless the loss is due to negligence or mismanagement of the Mudarib. If the loss is happening because of mismanagement, negligence, or some cause like this, then the Mudarib is responsible for that loss. Otherwise, the loss will stay with the Rabb al-Mal. Banks are usually not willing to provide financing under Mudaraba structure where capital is at risk. Awqaf organizations may enter into a Mudaraba as the capital provider. They have money, they can go and they will be the Rabb al-Mal or the financiers in that case. However, the Awqaf should be very careful when investing their cash in Mudaraba because of the risk of loss. You see, and the first responsibility of Awqaf is asset preservation and not to put, Awqaf assets under risk. So there is Awqaf as Rabb al-Mal should not have any part of the Mudarib, because you see, when the condition of Mudaraba is that the Mudarib will have complete control over the project, and the one who provided the money has no interference whatsoever. So evaluating the investment and the Mudarib is a challenge for Awqaf. There will always be uncertainty about the return on investment in Mudaraba, because you are investing, you don't know, you are waiting for a profit to come. It may come, it may not come. So there is this level of uncertainty about it. The net result of an investment will be only known when? At the end of the investment. Also, if there is a loss, it will not be easy to prove that the loss was due to negligence or mismanagement. This is another issue with it. It will be very difficult for Awqaf to gather enough evidence with that evidence to be able to prosecute again a case against the Mudarib. So this is, again, some issues for Awqaf to consider before getting into this type of arrangement, the Mudaraba arrangement with Awqaf money. There are different types of Mudaraba. There is the restricted Mudaraba. There are two types, restricted and unrestricted. Okay, restricted Mudaraba or Mudaraba Muqayyada in Arabic, it means that the investor specifies the amount specifies in the contract a particular business or investment that the working partner or mudarib shall invest the money. It says this is muqayyada. It's restricted. I'm the Rabb al-Mal, I'm the one who is financing. You cannot use this money except in this type of business or in this venture. I must have, the option to tell you, or have the right to tell you what to use the money in what business. The unrestricted mudaraba, it means as a waqf, we are putting the capital, we are giving the money to the mudarib to use it in whatever mudaraba he deems to be fit, okay, and profitable. And the waqf has no control over it. Of course, they can tell him you cannot use it in any business which is haram or which has any, let's say, uncertainty or anything which is doubtful from a Sharia point of view, so they can have that condition, but otherwise they have no control over where, or no say of how the bank will use that money in mudaraba. The bank may have different mudaraba transactions and they can use it, use the money there. Okay. The restricted or the unrestricted, unless pre-agreed, the mudarib is not allowed to delegate to a sub-mudarib. You see, when Awqaf is, let's say, contracting with a mudarib, that mudarib cannot just sub-lease it or give the business to somebody else on his behalf, okay, without the consent of the Rabb al-Mal. So he cannot delegate to a sub-mudarib, and he cannot commingle funds of other investors in a particular mudaraba. And in all cases, it is the responsibility of the mudarib to avoid unlawful and high-risk investment, as he will be liable for any losses suffered from such investments. Termination of a mudaraba. The mudaraba will be terminated by either party on giving notice to the other. The mudaraba will be terminated at the end of the term or completion of the deal. In this diagram, the diagram illustrates the structure of a mudaraba operation. There are two parties, as we can see, the investor, Rabb al-Mal, and there is the manager or the mudarib. The investor provides the capital, okay, to the investment, and the manager will provide the expertise. And then the sharing of the profit, part will go to the investor and part will go to the manager or to the mudarib.